And
Right.
so I view this as kind of a, if you can't see how this can be competitive, then you're not thinking deeply enough about it yet.
Well, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Kitchen Table TCG. Today, we are going to be sitting down and interviewing with Mike Waddell, the creator of Metazoo. Now, here's the heart. I'm not trying to sell you on a new game or do anything like that. What I'm trying to do, and what my attitude was going into this interview, was to try to capture the heart of Mike, to see what is Mike about and what does he want his game to be about. So that's really what I tried to do. I hope that you will enjoy the conversation. Even if you're not a fan of Metazoo, sit back and learn a little bit about the intentionality and the way that it was created. Maybe right some wrongs that you have in your brain, and whether or not you like the game. I do think it's a great dialogue on a TCG, and I hope that you enjoy the content as much as I enjoyed the conversation with Mike. So let's hop back in. All right, everyone. Hey, welcome back to Kitchen Table TCG. This time I'm honored to be joined by Mike Waddell. Mike, dude, so glad to have you. Medizoo, the creator of Medizoo, here on the channel. That is fantastic. How you doing today, man?
Not bad. Yeah, it seems just like yesterday I was sliding into your live YouTube video DMs and upsetting everyone with my presence, but it ends up working out. I think I think we have quite a few Medizoo fans coming out of the.
I think we do. I think we do, man. I had I have a store, and my patrons bought up all my first edition boxes like that. They snapped them up, so they like it, and I'm excited, man. I'm excited to share about Medizoo. I'm excited for me to learn about Medizoo a little bit more. More than that, I'm excited to learn about you. So I thought maybe the best way to start this would be for those viewers who are just here for Flesh and Blood, give them like an elevator pitch for Medizoo, and then we'll hop into some of the nitty gritty. But give them like an elevator pitch for Medizoo, and like I'm interested in what you have to say too about it.
Yeah, so Medizoo, it's a trading card game that really tries to play on the nostalgic aspects of what we all love with card games. So it has creatures from folklore. In the U.S. we call them cryptids. So think like Bigfoot, Chupacabra, Mothman, the Jersey Devil. And that's just in the U.S., right? The whole concept is these creatures can actually be from all over the world, and we're gonna expand into future blocks in the years to come. But it's not just a TCG, right? It's also we want to make it such that there are plushies and toys, and I'm writing a story about it to connect to lore, to the cards, and I really want it to be kind of a Metazoo world type situation. So. I'm really excited about kind of what the brand has in terms of potential, and so far people seem to really like it, and that's got me excited to continue to work on it.
That's awesome. All right, cool. That was the elevator pitch for Metazoo. I hope you're still here. I hope everyone's still walking around. Now I want to learn a little bit about you, Mike, because I'm incredibly intrigued how somebody goes from wherever you came from to like creating a TCG about cryptids. Like I'm incredibly interested in that. So tell me, like, what's your background? Where did you come from? What did you go to school for? Who is Mike Waddell? And then we'll talk a little bit about how that got into Metazoo.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Brazil from the ages of like 7 to 18, although I was born in Long Island. Okay. And so, I actually came to the U.S. for college, originally for political science and international relations. Didn't really like it. So I ended up going back to college for math and physics, and ended up doing all sorts of work with, NASA and the NSF and the Department of Defense and the Air Force, doing like robotics and algorithm, creation, solving like really esoteric math problems, and working for the Department of Energy on neutron physics. And then I ended up leaving that and going to New York back in 2016, where I was getting my master's at Columbia and working at Goldman Sachs as a data scientist in the equity space. So they have a division there called, Global Investment Research. And I was helping them do all sorts of alternative data, looking at alternative assets like collectibles and cryptocurrency.
Wow.
And started doing research again at Columbia, and ended up leaving Goldman in order to pursue a PhD there in applied physics and applied mathematics. Didn't end up liking that lifestyle too much, so I ended up leaving. And then COVID hit. Yeah. So throughout all of this, though, really dating back to kind of like what I call the renaissance of Pokemon back in 2016 with Pokemon Go. I started thinking about creating my own game. And
Okay.
so the genesis of Medizoo really goes back that far, where I was at Oak Ridge at the time, and I saw people playing Pokemon Go in this podunk. Oak Ridge is this really small town in Tennessee in the mountains, and I saw these like 45-year-old dudes in like radiological worker suits, like in a radioactive area, like catching on their phone, trying to catch Pokemon on Pokemon Go. Everyone was obsessed with it.
Yeah.
And so
and you're like, maybe this isn't just for kids, and maybe I can put my giant brain that worked at NASA and Goldman Sachs behind this to capture that attitude.
And well, I mean, I was such a huge fan of Pokemon and Magic growing up, and Pokemon Go revitalized that. I mean, and I think that a lot of people have a very similar story, right? They came back to it then as adults, but it wasn't. I didn't have the intent really up until 2 years ago. I want to say I didn't have the intent of creating a game. What I would do is I would like kind of on the back of a napkin. I would start creating this game. And at first it included, yokai, it included creatures from all over the world. The fourth wall effects came in really like 3 years ago. I never really had the intention of like pulling the trigger on it really until COVID kind of gave me that opportunity. Where I could, I really finalized a lot of the designs and narrowed the focus to be cryptids. Originally, the entire Cryptid Nation block was going to be one single set with hundreds of cards, and then I was like, "This is dumb." So I split it up. But yeah, no, it was always a kind of a hobby of mine. I think we all probably have hobbies like this where we, we're like, one day I'll do this, and I just kind of ended up deciding to actually do it one day.
So like. Not to demise what is Metazoo, because Metazoo is already a great, like, big, it's growing, it's like a massive thing. But to sum it up, it sounds like Metazoo was in some ways like your COVID project, right? Like, like the rest of us have, like, I don't know, I guess this YouTube channel was my COVID project. So like it's grown into something bigger than I ever thought it could. But I think a lot of people like, maybe they sorted through their bulk, or maybe they, they picked up a new hobby. Like, you created a brand and a business in the middle of COVID. That's awesome. Like, that's such a cool, like, I love that. Like, if COVID, looking at like the silver lining and things, right? Like, I think a lot of us had terrible experiences during COVID, but then there's this other world that, like, it did open up more time, like with family, it opened up more time with freedom to pursue something like this. And so this was like your COVID project that's now your full-time. Obviously I see you on Instagram, you're going to all these different conventions, and this is a massive, you're trying to be a global company, right? So like this is now your whole thing. So what's then how did you bring cryptids into that? Because like when I first learned about Medizoo, I was like, so like I'll back up. I actually backed your game on Kickstarter and then canceled my pledge.
You were the one.
Because my wife, I have a Kickstarter problem, and anytime I open the Kickstarter app, I back something. And my wife one day was like, "You have to stop." And I was like, "Okay." And I was like, "Well, can I keep backing the things that I backed today?" And she said no. So I had to cancel Metazoo, which I obviously regret now. It's worth $1 billion. But tell me how this got into, like, when I first saw it, I was like, do I like cryptids that much? And I was like, Bigfoot's cool. And then like the more that I thought, like, I live in West Virginia, so I know Mothman, and there's the Mothman Festival. I was like, okay, like cryptids are pretty cool. Tell me how you, like, where's the connection for you in creating an entire game around cryptids? Like, do you just love cryptids that much, or were you just like kind of searching for like an available non-targeted item like that?
So it's a good question. I think I would be doing a disservice to the real cryptid fans out there if I said that I was like a cryptid junkie for my entire life.
Yeah,
I've always, like my first real experience with cryptids was, watching Mothman Prophecies back in like 2003 or something like that. So I've always like really loved Mothman, and I've loved some cryptids. My mom is a huge like Bigfoot junkie. She watches all the History Channel, shows on searching for Bigfoot, and I kind of grew up with that as well. But really, it was kind of a moment of honesty with myself, where I was like, I can't come up with all these characters on my own, and I doubt that I could sell people on new characters that they're not already passionate about. So,
Sure.
What I decided to do was I was like, hey, cryptids they have a baked-in fan base already in the tens of millions all around the world. There doesn't seem to be an existing lightning rod that bring all these things under an IP that everyone can kind of get around, right? You have, the Mothman fans, you have Bigfoot fans, you have kind of these isolated things that have developed on their own, but nothing
And
really,
very compartmentalized to the area of the world, right?
which is amazing. But like, it's odd to me, and people probably have done this before, but it doesn't seem to have taken off yet until really Metazoo came around. But it seemed odd to me that someone didn't take all these things and say, hey, we can create an entire universe about this, and use it as an opportunity to celebrate like American culture and the developing folklore that we have, because it really is fascinating. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of these things that are all based on experiences that Americans have had. And, I'm focusing on the US right now because that's where Crypto Nation is, but it's not just the US. It's really the genesis of all folklore, if you think about it.
So then, like, as I imagine, as somebody who isn't deeply enveloped in that culture, or wasn't deeply involved in that culture, you create the US ones. Then as you keep going deeper, you're like, oh my gosh, like this exists everywhere. And like the can of worms just kept opening. In my brain, I imagine that like you're developing this thing. It's like, oh my gosh, it doesn't just have to be US. It can also be, from all these different things, they come together in the story. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, and actually, it was the opposite direction, where I have a spreadsheet somewhere with thousands of these things from all over the world, and I was like, I gotta like focus this, right? Like I have to, from like a purely a business standpoint, like I really have to focus on this. I feel most comfortable focusing on either the Brazilian side of it or the American side of it, and I opted to say, like, to myself, I'm like, well, let's just try out the US one, right?
Yeah.
They seem to love creature type things from other places of the world, and like we have this stuff in our backyard, so let's give it a shot. And it seems to really resonate with people.
Awesome. All right. So then what does Metazoo bring to the TCG world? Mitch from Midtown Merchant, I know you've talked to Mitch a little bit, and one of the Tim Trusty actually sent us both some Kickstarter pre-con decks, and we played a game about it. And one of the things I really realized is it's a little bit of a deeper game than I maybe gave it credit for originally when I was just opening packs. There's a sense to the community right now where it's like collecting and opening packs, and the first edition isn't even out yet, right? Like it's July 18th, and like your first edition's not even out yet. So like I always thought like it's kind of a lighthearted game, and when I played it, it was a lot more deep than I understood it to be at first. And it has a lot of mechanics. Like it has like the same mana system basically as Magic the Gathering. Correct me if I'm wrong, but similar mana system as Magic the Gathering. It has a lot of the Pokemon stuff, right, where you have weaknesses and strengths. And it has, the other TCGs have pulled into as well. And then it has a lot of the Yu-Gi-Oh stuff where you're able to attack a specific character or specific Pokemon, or sorry, a specific Medizoo character, specific cryptid, beastie as they're called. See, I'm learning. So tell me what does Medizoo bring to the TCG world that doesn't already exist, and what are you passionate about in that way?
Yeah. So a lot of people, because they focus, and it's the easier thing to focus on, so I don't blame them, on the collectability aspects that I baked into the product. They just assumed that I was like, screw it with the playability part. But what they have to recognize is that the playability and the mechanics came before the focus on cryptids specifically, right? Like I wanted a game that had kind of all the gears and wheels and knobs of the TCGs that I love, but then had this fourth wall aspect to it, right? And so I put in a lot of, as much synergy as I could bake in, as much complexity. Like what I wanted is I wanted a game that had a really low barrier to entry and that was inviting to people to play, but the ceiling on complexity was incredibly high, right? And, you know, and it's kind of a cliche to use chess as an example, but anyone can learn chess from a very young age, but the ceiling on complexity when it comes to chess is almost infinite, right?
Right.
And you know, with Yu-Gi-Oh, I felt it's an amazing game, but I felt like it's hard to just jump into. I feel like you almost have to have always played Yu-Gi-Oh in order to play it.
Right.
Magic and Pokemon are different. I think that they are very welcoming to new players as well. So, you know, they have that going for them. I'm not too sure or too convinced about the ceiling on complexity with Pokemon, but of course, Magic does have that. But then you have to question whether or not the barrier to entry for Magic is as low as it should be or as low as it is with Pokemon. So all that to say, like going forward, I'm going to create these sets with that in mind. And I think that we're almost unique in that, where it's kind of like, it's very welcoming. You think that the game can be played in a very simple format, but then once you start adding the fourth wall stuff, and once you start thinking about that as what you can do with that from a format perspective in terms of competitive play, organized play, there's really no ceiling to it. And on that note, like I really want to partner, maybe not even produce it in-house, but I want to partner with companies in order to create an organized play scene that really focuses on kind of the razzle dazzle of competitive play. Like if you can imagine a tournament where we have these synthetic fourth wall environments, or pseudo environments as I call them, where it is actually fun to televise because, you know, we have a semi-working volcano that's set up in the arena, right? And I know it sounds silly, but like, you know, if we can make the purses attractive enough, if we can make the spectacle interesting enough, then there's no reason why we can't do what esports did, where they have, you know, it's actually considered a sport now, and people like they take it very, very seriously, and it appeals to more people, more than just the people that play.
Yeah, we haven't seen that in the TCG world since like the early mid 2000s with Magic the Gathering.
Yep, and it seems like something that some of them are even moving away from, and I won't. Yeah, you know, I'm not going to disparage anyone, but
and now like you have YouTube, you have the ease of access for that. It doesn't have to be on ESPN; it can be on, you know, YouTube channels and stuff like that. So for those of the people who don't know, explain to me real briefly what a fourth wall effect is. Actually, you know, let me try to explain it, because maybe you can correct people. So essentially you have on your card, it says something along the lines of, like you just use the volcano as a reference. Like if a volcano is in sight, or if you're near a active volcano, then this effect happens, or it gets plus blank or whatever. So it's interesting to me that you just brought up competitive play, because I think one of the big conversation pieces that's been happening in like our Discord server and things like that is this question of how competitive can Medizoo really be with these fourth wall effects as a result of the difference in locations, or if it just happens to rain one night and you're at the LGS and it happens to rain and all of a sudden this deck is way better, it affects the competitive play. So tell me a little bit, like answer to that a little bit, because I think like I love it. I think it's really interesting, and like I'm not a competitive player, and that's why at my place, like I felt like, hey, I can't wait to play this game like with my wife. I can't wait to play it with my friends at the kitchen table. I have a whole YouTube channel called KitchenTableTCG. My focus is not my focus is not like the competitive scene. So like that didn't bother me at all. I actually liked it. Like I actually loved the idea of like checking the radar on a Friday night and being like, oh, it's gonna rain, I'm gonna bring the crazy water deck, or you know what I mean? Like I like that idea, but I know other people are worried about that in the competitive sphere. So talk to me a little bit more about that.
So I think the people that are worried about it because they think that it's the result of not having any forethought when coming up with a competitive aspect of the game. When in reality, like I said, like I put an untold number of hours into thinking about structuring this. There will be different formats. Some will outright ignore the surrounding fourth wall effects. Some will rely entirely on Terra cards, which are the cards that trigger fourth wall effects kind of in a rotational way in the arena, regardless of as to whether or not they're in your environment. Some of them, so a format will focus on the pseudo environments that are set up immediately around you, and that's what your environment is. Some of them will be randomized environments. So there are a lot of different formats that we want to kind of ilk out and see how they work out, and some won't be right for other people.
Yeah,
honestly, it's a matter of creativity. I think that we'll have to develop in some people. So if you're a competitive player, imagine, if you will, you are presented with a pseudo environment that you don't know what the fourth wall effects are, but you have a side deck or side decks that once it's revealed to you, maybe you have 30 minutes to build a deck.
That's cool.
And call it kind of like a blitz type of play where you will have people who spend weeks, if not months, creating a single deck. And that deck will dominate in certain formats, but they get destroyed by a 12-year-old who's just better at creating these blitz decks on the fly when presented with a random pseudo environment, right? They're entirely different skill sets, but there's all relevant to the game. And so I view this as kind of if you can't see how this can be competitive, then you're not thinking deeply enough about it yet.
Right. You're just going with what has been done in the past. So it's interesting that you said formats. So almost you could have different formats that are based upon the way that the fourth wall effect works. So whereas a lot of games utilize different form, like Magic the Gathering, right? You have Pauper, which is a format that's just common cards. It's what's in your deck. You can navigate your formats. You could do that if you wanted, but you can navigate your formats to different utilization of the fourth wall effect. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it'll be up to the local game store that's putting on organized play as to what they want to prioritize, right? Because some of them will be in a city and there's nothing interesting around them, but some of them will be in an interesting environment where, they have to, maybe they do want to take the fourth wall factors into consideration. Like, it'll all be something that we have to work out, but that's a conversation that will start to happen and has already started to happen, and we're figuring it out, right? It's something that we're going to discover as we go along, and I think that's okay to admit. We don't have to have everything solved right now.
I love that the LGS has the freedom to do that, right? Like, I was thinking that, as an LGS, it would be cool to be like, hey, next Saturday night for Medizoo Saturday, we're going to have a volcano and a broken tree. And like literally at the LGS, you could have somebody build a volcano, and you could have somebody bring in some tree trunks, and like
maybe some drinks come out of the volcano too. And it's like, you
can make it fun. And I really think like this is the type of, we're seeing all sorts of different types of LGSs pop up. We're seeing LGSs that are breweries. We're seeing LGSs that are all these different things there. In my town, there was for about 2 years, it closed during COVID, but there was an LGS that was literally a like old time hamburger shop. Like, you could go in and order hamburgers and like whatever. And so it's not just like the hole in the wall LGS anymore. It's LGSs that are trying to adapt and make different business decisions. And like, this could be a really cool, fun, you could do a Metazoo luau, right? And you have like we keep harping on the volcano, but like, there's a lot of fun things that I think you can do with it.
And this is one of the things that, when I was at Goldman, we talked about all the time. People believed that just because online retail was on the rise, that brick and mortar was going to disappear. But brick and mortar is still the lifeblood of most industries. And even though online is on the rise, we're talking percentage points in comparison to like 90% that's still brick and mortar. So what a lot of brick and mortar businesses are doing is they're focusing, like you just said, more on the experiential, right? So, you walk into a Harley Davidson shop and they have a band playing, right?
Right.
Or, and it's kind of almost like the mall experience from the 1990s, 1980s, where it's cool to go into these stores because they're not necessarily focused on efficiency, but rather kind of making it a good time when you walk through the doors. You can't get that online. So the fourth wall effects were made so that they could be facilitated at a local game store, or at convention centers, or these big tournaments. They're made specifically for in-person events. And I know that sounds crazy having made that in COVID, but like I also knew that COVID wasn't going to always be around.
Right.
And when things did open up, I think it's going to be kind of like the roaring 20s again, where people are going to go crazy to be able to go out and interact with people. So I think that the timing almost couldn't even be better.
Yeah, I like it. So you have all these fourth wall effects, and that's what makes Metazoo different from other games. That's your big kind of thing. One of the other things you kind of mentioned was like you wanted to have plushies and all this merch, and this has been I would say maybe one of the, maybe disagree if you want, but like a hot button topic in the community a little bit.
Sure.
I see all the time people are like, you'll put out a new thing and the comment section will say something along the lines of like, why don't you try to help people get the cards to play rather than that? And like I hate that, because like you can't just like hit a print button and have cards in the hands of people. Like there's got to be like a lot of work behind that, right? Like there's a lot of work that takes like to get a product to people.
I can't tell you how. Yeah. Sorry. It's so hard.
Yeah, I'm sure that's frustrating. But tell me a little bit about why you believe in merch, because you obviously, like, I have a Medizoo backpack here, I have on a Medizoo hoodie, and this is a Flesh and Blood channel, and like I don't have that because Flesh and Blood doesn't do that. So I'm really curious, where do you see like the IP and branding coming in as opposed to just being a trading card game?
Sure. I mean, I think that, so to go back to the first question, a lot of people will complain that, hey, we released the card game and there's no other supplementary IP. When Pokemon came out, it had a game and all this other kind of stuff. So I'm like, all right, so I'm going to write a story. And I've had the story kind of in my notebooks for years at this point. And I'm going to release like, merch and eventually a game and hopefully, a television series. And then those same people were like, how dare you, like, you should be focusing on the card game. Like, you don't care about playability. And it's like, whatever. So like for me, I view the brand potential of this to be so much more than just the card game, although the card game is that core part of it. But it's all about experiencing this Metazoo world. And for me, the thing that I love about Disney, the thing I love about Pokemon is that it's not just the Disney shows or the movies. It's not just the Pokemon cards or the games. It's everything else. Like, and when I was growing up, if I wanted to have a Pikachu toothpaste, I could do that. And of course, I loved that. Like if my girlfriend wears the Medizoo shoes, and every time we go out, without fail, people say like, those are the coolest shoes I've ever seen. And they're like, what's Medizoo? And so people love experiencing something that they love in as many ways as possible. And I feel I would be doing a disservice to them as a creator if I were limiting their access to that world. Imagine if Disney was like, you could only see the movies. We don't do any merch. So if you want to wear, Mickey ears, like, go screw yourself, right?
Right.
Like, but people want to wear the Mickey ears and they want to feel like they're part of something. Yep. And I was walking, I'm in San Fran right now looking at retail space. And I was walking on the shoreline, and I saw people wearing Pikachu ears, and they were handing out Pikachu ears so that other people could identify Pokemon Go players because they were having a Pokemon Go event. And it was cool. Like, people want to feel like they're part of something. And so, wearing a Medizoo sweater and seeing someone else wear, and they're like, hey, like you love something that I love. And that has to be part of it. That has to be part of the sustainable aspect of this world that we're creating.
It becomes part of your identity as a consumer. What you as a consumer, what you consume in content or gameplay or whatever becomes part of your identity. So you want to represent that identity well.
And there's something, and I think that's a beautiful thing, right? Like I'm wearing a Columbia t-shirt right now. I love the fact that I was a part of that community and will always be part of that community. And I think that's a very human thing. And I think with Flesh and Blood, people love the game, and if Flesh and Blood made T-shirts and wrote books about it, and kind of did like Dragonlance series where they opened it up and they built out that world, people would eat it up. They'd love it.
Yeah.
Would you have people that are like, it can only be a trading card game? Sure, but there are always going to be people that want more and more of that thing that you're creating, and I feel like I'm obligated to do that. Otherwise, I'm almost taking away their ability to fully enjoy something that they're falling in love with.
So then, like, as this goes from your COVID project to like now you are navigating printers and card games and now merch and all this other stuff, is there a sense in you that's like, I need to bring on a bigger team? Because I have noticed that you're like the Discord server, you have some people who are taking over some roles and some different things as a business, because you wear all these hats, right? Like you're both designer, plus you're designing merch, plus you're organizing, I think you do have an art director, I think I noticed that, but you're organizing the artwork, plus you're always on, I don't know how you're always on Discord. Every time I message you, you reply in like 3 minutes. Like, is there a sense in you that's like, okay, at some point I'm going to grow this team so that I can start compartmentalizing the things that, in other words, like a lot of people can go and make merch, right? That's not something that's exclusive to Mike. Is there a sense in like growing your business then? And where do you feel like you're doing that?
So yes, the team that we do have right now is amazing, and they do an incredible job when it comes to art and moderating and whatnot, and marketing and so forth. But for sure, I wear a lot of different hats. Luckily, and a lot of the stuff hasn't been announced yet, but the team is expanding, and more importantly, that expansion and kind of the adoption of those responsibilities that I currently have, by those other people, allow me to focus on the creative, right? Because I'm the one that's writing the story. I'm the one that's, designing a lot of the cards. But I want to keep it lean. And the way that you do that is you form corporate partnerships. So if, for instance, Hasbro is making our plushies, and organizing that is just a matter of me setting up phone calls and wooing them with Metazoo, then I don't have to worry about it. All I have to worry about is essentially making sure that their design is up to snuff. Now, I come up with the creative way of making and marketing those plushies, or at least I try to, and then they tell me no, and or we iterate back and forth. And the Hasbro is just an example, right? But so that's the way that I'm viewing it is as I expand into these other verticals, I'm going to form partnerships with other companies. And if you think about it, that's exactly what Pokemon did when they first came over into the US. They didn't produce a lot of their own stuff. They didn't have their own Pikachu toothpaste. They
went to Crest.
They collaborated with Crest, and now what a lot of Pokemon does is done in-house. And so you have all these old companies that have really high pedigree in the industry still, but there's no longer that partnership with Pokemon.
Right.
So almost like there's a vacuum.
Yeah, it leaves the door open for some other people to come in and do them.
Theoretically, right?
Yeah.
So, I've been hard at work behind scenes, kind of seeing if that strategy will work out. And there will be some announcements in the coming weeks regarding that.
Cool. So then, what does the development look like? You create the cards, you create the story and the lore, and that all is happening inside Mike's head, right? That's kind of what I get. And then you put it onto paper, and then how does it go from that to like what are the steps between that and then production of the cards? I'm interested in some of the play testing and all that kind of thing.
Sure. So originally it was me and another guy that came on maybe September of last year, actually making the cards in like Photoshop and then sending them off to the printer. Now it's a bit more involved where I actually have help from Kevin on our R&D team. We're looking at hiring someone else. And then we have a team of about 15 what we call metazoologists who are kind of like our judges or professors.
Okay.
And they're doing play testing actively for like Nightfall right now.
Oh, cool.
And so, you know,
Nightfall being the next set for those people who don't know. Nightfall is that's supposed to be October. Is that what I've?
Yep, October, exactly.
Okay.
So Kevin and I come up with that first card idea, and then we put it to the play testers. We iterate, and then the card is ready to go. Meanwhile, happening in parallel to this is I'm working with the artists and getting the art done, and then the Photoshop files or the Illustrator files for the cards are made by me and Brian on our team, who's our like QC director, and then we ship it off to the printer, and that's about it.
Cool.
It's pretty simple. We're not going to have sample cards anymore, but what we will have is we're going to have right now the playtesting is done digitally on Tabletop Simulator.
Okay.
But as a thank you to the playtesters, we're going to have the finalized beta cards of the playtesting printed out in master sets. That will be then they'll have a gray border, and those will be given out to the playtesters that helped. And I think that'll be like our policy moving forward.
Yeah, that's cool. Like I know, like having playtest cards is like a historical thing for people who playtest, and it's pretty cool. I'm curious, who does the printing for Medizoo?
So we have we are under an NDA where we can't say that.
Interesting. Okay, I didn't realize that was something like that. That's cool. Okay,
but we will be announcing who the printer is for our upcoming sets in the next 2 weeks.
Okay, sweet. All right. Well, I did have some questions about the QR codes. Are the QR code they have been removed in first edition? Is that what I understand? Okay. So I was very excited about QR codes because I thought there was something secretive about them in relation to the NFTs. Is there anything going to be happening with the NFTs that you're allowed to disclose to me? With the NFTs and the QR codes and that kind of thing, is there any space there in your design process?
So the NFTs, absolutely. There's major work being done on that. I can't disclose too much, obviously, but we're also trying to be cognizant of the image around NFTs. So like there are things called like green NFTs that are coming out. Anyways. But yes, NFTs will play a part in it because a lot of people like collecting them and they're cool, right?
And it's the future. I mean, it really is the future of collectibles, right? Like we can all talk about LGSs and in-store stuff and physical cards. We all like that, but like it would be irresponsible for anybody to be like, no, there's not a future in like cryptocurrency and crypto collectibles. So like I understand why you would want to have part of that.
Yeah, and people want it. So like again, kind of that idea of people who want a sweatshirt or something like that. Like I'm not gonna like thousands of people are asking me for NFTs. I'm not gonna be like, well, I don't believe in them as a no. They're here and they're willing to pay for it now. And guess what? It's just like a card, but it has a digital thing anyway. So I think that a lot of people made the mistake back in 2015 to 2017 underestimating what crypto would do. And a lot of them are poorer than they would be otherwise. So and a lot of people are richer than they would be otherwise as a result. So, and I don't think that they're a lesser class of collectibles just because they're digital. I think that's myopic, right? Especially if people want to collect them. So, I mean, what Neopets going back in time was it Neopets?
Yeah, the little
Webkins. They're my
okay.
friend. Yeah.
Neopets were also a thing. Yeah.
But so Webkins were a thing over a decade ago, I think, right? So, it'd be again silly to think that we shouldn't touch on that, and I personally think that they're cool. So
yeah, I mean, like I remember even speaking 1996, right? Like collecting Pokemon on my Game Boy and being like, dude, look at my Pokemon that I got on my Game Boy, and like showing that off, and like this is
Tamagotchis even.
Yeah, Tamagotchis, and even now we were just talking about Pokemon Go too, where it's like I caught this Pokemon. I don't actually own anything. Like you don't like it's numbers in a digital world, but like you still are proud of it, and I think there's a lot of room there.
And Pokemon Go, I think, is a perfect example of how people go crazy for that. So, NFTs, if you think about it, they're proof that you own that particular Pokemon Go character that's in your inventory, right? Like It's not too different. For the QR codes, it was honestly a miscalculation on my part. I didn't know that the computer vision in relation to cards had gotten to the point where the cards were scannable to like in their entirety without a QR code. But obviously, anyone that's used the TCG player scanner knows that that's the case, right? Gotcha. And it's getting better and better. So, as I'm sure everyone knows already by now, like we're partnering with TCG Player, and ideally we will get our cards scannable in their database, and we'll go from there. In terms of what we originally wanted to use the QR codes for.
Gotcha. So originally the QR codes was like scan to get the card,
exactly. But it's not
the card online, and then now it's not necessary because you can just scan the card with an app. Cool. Yeah. I'm excited about the NFT thing. I do think that I think that's the type of thing that's really hard for a company like Magic the Gathering to insert into a game that's been around for 30 years. Like how do you add an NFT to a Black Lotus, right? Like how do you create that as part of the game? How do you even create it as part of the collectible inside the world of like that game? And so I think it's really cool. You as a new company and Medizoo as a new game, like the world is your oyster, and you can start from the ground up, and you've already kind of laid the foundation of the work to do that. And I think that's a really interesting approach, even if you don't have I'm sure you do, but like even if you don't know exactly where it's going to go, like that you need to have it there to get there, which is really cool.
Yeah, we have a little bit of more runway because we're new, so we can screw up almost with a little bit more freedom to ask for forgiveness. Whereas if Magic does that, then it's kind of like they'd probably lose players that have been around for almost 30 years, right? We have a little bit more flexibility.
Cool. All right. So speaking of Magic being around for 30 years, will Metazoo exist in 10 years? And how will you continue to develop new expansions for this cryptid idea in order to we talk about there's thousands of cryptids. So you probably have, 50 sets, whatever. But at some point, do you run out of cryptids? And then what are some other things that you need to do as a brand and as a businessman to make sure that Metazoo is still around in 10 years? People are investing thousands of dollars. Right now, I just bought a Kickstarter box for $2,000 the other day. Like, what are you doing so that my $2,000 investment doesn't go to crap is basically what I'm asking you.
As you know, that's my main priority, making sure your investments are protected. No, good question. So I have a 20-year plan with blocks of sets, and the backbone of that is going to be the illustrated story. So, if you look at, and I'm using kind of the business model of things like Naruto, One Piece, how do these brands have the longevity from a brand perspective that keep people from, people like will leave and then come back, and there's always something new for them to do. And I think that following kind of the manga type style where you have a new injection of IP coming in the form of story, that keeps people like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. And then, next month they come back and they buy the newest chapter that's been published, and there's a card that's inserted into it. And using that as kind of the main backbone for all the other IP, I think is, look at what Harry Potter did, right? Harry Potter had around 10 years of people actively obsessed with it as she wrote the story, right? Was it 10 years? Yeah, I think it was around 10 years, right? And, she was releasing the books, and then everything else was supplementary to those books.
Right.
So for me, even if it's every month, having this new injection of the Medizoo world as I'm building it is how I view kind of that longevity being sustainable. And so, and that story will coincide with the sets that are coming out. It'll coincide maybe with the show, the movie that the movies that are coming out, or that we would like to come out in the future. So, but really we need the story, because everything else will flow from that story. And Pokemon came up with a story 25 years ago that was so good that they can kind of recycle it every set or every block of sets, right? I'd like the Medizoo story to be a bit more flexible in terms of what it does with it won't be like a revamp of a core kind of formula. It will have a progression that I've planned out for the next 20 odd years or so.
That's awesome. And I love, my daughter interrupting in the middle of this is a perfect example of why things need to be able to have a 20-year plan, right? Like as as we all saw with Pokemon, the huge Pokemon boom that's happening right now is also a result of people my age having kids and wanting to introduce their kids to those things. And cryptids have this other sense of, like, you tell these cryptid stories, like you talk about Bigfoot with your kids, they hear about the Loch Ness monster on the playground, and like you talk about those things. And so it's a way for kids and parents and whatever to enjoy things. And I think that is like a huge factor of Metazoo. I don't think you're not trying to create a kids game, but the fact is that Metazoo is a game that could be played by you mentioned a 12-year-old earlier. So I think there's a lot of room there for growth. So cool. I like that. I love that you have a 10-year plan, a 20-year plan. That's super awesome. And I think it's super important, and I respect that a lot.
And 20 years sounds like a long time, but if you think about it, we're already basically through year one. And it has, and
you haven't even released a set yet.
Yeah, exactly. So, we're going to be celebrating the 5-year anniversary very soon. But it's important for me as a creator to communicate that I'm all in, right? 20 years for me, I'll be 50 by the time that we get to that. So it's a lifetime.
Yeah.
And then I'll still be 50, which actually isn't that old from like an executive standpoint. So if I want to keep things going, 20 years is just what I have planned for the core. What I actually have planned for the long term, though, is I really view this from a brand perspective, like I mentioned, as having the same potential as something like Disney World, where they have folklore from all over the world, but it's all connected under a single brand. But I also think that the potential for this is such that we could invite other creatives into the world to write about cryptids that are in the Medizoo world, but kind of like,
that's cool.
It's almost like a Marvel-esque style where my creation can outlive me as more and more people build into the world with their own illustrated stories, comics, and have ownership or almost agency over the way that the story is told about cryptids that are important to their local culture, right? Like you don't want some white dude writing about a South African cryptid and how it's important to the local culture there.
Right. It's a little bit like what the show Black Mirror does, right? Where it's like the same kind of feeling of a show, but they have a different director come in and direct it however they want with whatever art style they want. And that's really cool. Like I think that's a really great way. And I would say like doesn't even have to be when you're 50, right? Like that's a cool way to see the growth of the game. And then you start seeing like if an author comes in and writes part of the story and they bring their following into the Metazoo world, that's another way that you can start seeing the game just get more and more eyeballs and more growth, which is
so incredible. Stan Lee's approach of kind of opening up the Marvel world, but then making sure that all the storylines kind of make sense together, and then having crossovers and all this kind of stuff. Like, you know,
and then just calling it a parallel universe and saying that it works.
And then having, like, you know, Crisis of Infinite Earths. That was DC, but you know, but then having all this creative power being brought in, that's how a brand survives long term, right? I at some point I want the core story to be written by me. You know, kind of like Stan Lee had his fingers or his hand in the main and the core groups of Marvel. But if it wants to live out, like, it has to extend beyond me at some point. Yeah. And I think it has that potential because it has that global appeal, to have every story that's about, you know, some folklore creature or urban legend to be part of the Medizoo world. I think we have that potential.
That's awesome. I really like that. I really like the vision for that and the way that, you know, allows you to grow. And even, you know, you can experience that with different artists. You can experience that with different, you know, game designs and set designs and whatever. That's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah. And so while people, you know, they're quick to compare us to Pokemon because of the aesthetics and the creature aspect, like from a brand perspective, we're much more going to be like, I want to model us much more off of Disney and Marvel in that sense.
That's cool. Well, awesome, man. Well, hey, last question. I noticed on the Beastie map. Okay, so you've done this awesome map, and I know you've talked about it a lot. Where you have this awesome map, and it's got all the beasties all over the United States, and you've kind of said, like, that's just this set. You're going to have other, you know, sets that are for Europe and whatever. On the Beastie map, there's a number 79 that has question mark that happens to be right where I am from, around in the Appalachian area in West Virginia. So my question to you is, what is Beastie number 79? And tell me everything you know about it.
So read the illustrated story. It will
Come on. It'll be revealed in the future in the illustrated.
Yeah, I mean, stay tuned, right? Next week on Metazoo. No, I mean, I've laid little Easter eggs everywhere, right? It's a labor of love, and so some things will be left open-ended until they're circled back to. And I promise I won't pull a Game of Thrones and you know,
and leave a coffee cup in the background.
Exactly, and leave leave everyone hanging on these threads that I'm you know, leaving hanging out there, right? So everything will be revealed in due time.
Okay, well, fine. I wish I knew more. I wish I knew more about the cryptid stuff in West Virginia. I just know Mothman. Mothman's super popular down here. So, are you going to Mothman Festival?
I am, yeah, and Cryptid Con and Van Meter Festival.
I love that. Like, I had for people who are here 53 minutes in, which will be hardly anybody. I had another podcast called Between Two Headphones with a buddy of mine. This was actually my first COVID project. Okay. And we got to interview one of my favorite bands, which was a band by the name of Sherwood. Well, the band had broken up, and the lead singer of Sherwood, actually now runs a podcast that's all about cryptids. So our podcast, that episode, moved from like talking about a band to talking about cryptids. And I was fascinated that there's like this whole world of people who care so much about cryptids. Like, for me, it's like, yeah, Bigfoot, I've seen pictures. He's probably there. Totally a believer in aliens. I actually told everybody on my channel that as soon as your UFO set comes out, which I think is the one after the one in October, is that accurate?
Yeah, so it's going to be so it's going to be Nightfall in October, Wilderness in March, and then UFO will be the summer set.
So I told everybody I'm done with Flesh and Blood when UFOs come out, because like, and also I'm done with Medizoo past UFOs coming out, and it's just going to be this whole channel. It's just going to be me talking about UFOs and the Medizoo cards. So anyway, I believe all that stuff, but like, I never realized that people were so immersed in the cryptid kind of conversation. And so I
Yeah.
think it's great. I mean, you've got this huge following of people who are going to be involved in Medizoo just simply because they like cryptids. Plus,
Exactly.
you've got this huge group of people who like trading card games, and we're in this world right now where there's so much space for people to come into a new TCG. And not that it's not about Magic failing, it's not about Pokemon failing. It's just simply put, like, people are excited about newer stuff too. And so I think the world is kind of open for these games like Flesh and Blood and Metazoo and some of the other ones that are popping up too to kind of open some of that space. So. Awesome, man. Well, thank you for doing this, and thanks for hanging out. Anything else that you want to say to the people who are still here?
Well, thanks for listening an hour in. But of course, this is just the beginning, right? So I know that you're going to be releasing Metazoo content, so keep an eye out for that. I watch all of your videos, and I lurk on your live videos. So
we love that.
I'll be around, I'll be around. So come to the Discord. You can talk to me, and I'd love to talk to everyone about Medizoo.
Cool. Can people leave questions in the comments, and you'll pop in and try to answer some of them if you can?
Obsessively, yes.
Okay. Awesome. Well, awesome. Well, hey everyone, thanks for watching. Remember to be kind to people around you, and we'll see you later for another video. And thank you, Mike, for being here.